I want to give a huge and extended congratulations to a lot of the young guys that had participated in Montreal Canadiens training camp and that were good enough to make the cut. We had ourselves news yesterday with the NHL finalizing a lot of their rosters that, hey, there are some new faces in Montreal and their names that happen to be pretty young. Before we get into that, though, I just wanted to talk about the gameplay because, yes, NHL 23 is indeed out. If everything goes according to plan, then what you're watching is hopefully some National Hockey League 23 gameplay of maybe something in Ultimate Team, maybe a Squad Battles game, maybe a Rivals game if I can find an opponent that I can defeat early on in the game's life cycle, but who knows? I know a lot of you don't care about the gameplay, but it's kind of the vehicle that I use to make these videos, so I do feel it's somewhat important to acknowledge when everything gets changed around. But still, today's news update on the Montreal Canadiens goes over the news we had yesterday when it comes to the names that made the roster. Take a look at this. The Montreal Canadiens had themselves their opening night roster for 2022-2023. Let's read through this together. On forwards, you have Josh Anderson, Cole Caulfield, Doc, Dadonov, Drouin, Dvorak, Evans, Gallagher, Hoffman, Monahan, Pezzetta, Pitlick, Juraj Slafkovsky, and Nick Suzuki. On defense, you have Caden Cooley, Jordan Harris, Jonathan Kovacevic, who, by the way, was a waiver pickup from the Winnipeg Jets, Mike Matheson, David Savard, Chris Weidman, and then for goalies, you have Allen and Montembeault. This is a pretty interesting roster, not just because everything is blue and pink, by the way, the pink visor, very nice graphic done by the Canadiens and their social media team, but as Eric Engels points out, this means that Cooley, Jiricek, Harris, and Slafkovsky are starting the season with the Habs. Now, I know it says that Jiricek is going to be on the team in the tweet, but on the graphic, he's not there. The reason he wasn't on the roster from yesterday when they made the announcement is because they needed to wait a day, put Paul Byron on the LTIR, and then Jiricek could be called up with no cap problem. So, pretty much, it had to do with cap constraints as to why Jiricek was not included on the graphic, but if everything works out the way it should have worked out, then he is on the roster on Wednesday. It's no big deal. Here's the tweet that kind of goes over everything. Eric Engels says that Cooley, Jiricek, Harris, and Slafkovsky were all called into a meeting and told together that they made the Canadiens. They were also told there are many good players who could make staying in the NHL pretty difficult, and that things could shift quickly. Engels says in another tweet, then again, a waiver claim or a trade that brings a defenseman in could very well mean one of Jiricek or Harris will go down between now and Wednesday night if Mike Matheson starts the season on time. And this is what I wanted to talk about today. The first overall pick, Juraj Slafkovsky, and the fact that he made the team right off the bat. Now, there were many conversations that we had had over the past few weeks discussing Slafkovsky and how good he had been at the Prospects tournament, how good he was at the preseason showcase that he was given, and whether or not he should have deserved a spot in the first place. Now, a lot of people would go out there and say that many of the games that he played were not great. You'd find many who would say that as the preseason went on, Slafkovsky got a little bit better. He had a few better games after he got his legs really moving, and by the end of it, he certainly wasn't a bad hockey player. Like, you definitely could see that there were things that Slafkovsky was doing, leading the rush, forcing pucks into the corners, and digging things out that were positive traits. It's just, he'd fall down quite often. He'd lose the puck because he'd skate into traffic a little bit too much. He wasn't scoring goals like he had been at the Olympics, where he was just finding the net constantly and beating goaltenders left, right, and center. Nor was he going out there and really persevering in the same way that he did at the same tournaments. The World Championships and the Olympics saw Slafkovsky just absolutely dominate and be a complete step above everybody else. While he was okay, Slafkovsky was not that. And so, when it came to the discussion as to whether or not the best decision would have been to play him in the NHL or the AHL, there were many people, myself included, and in the comment section of that video that we made, saying, yeah, I honestly wouldn't be opposed to Slafkovsky starting out the year in Laval. It's not that he wasn't completely ready, it's just that he could have really been better before being a Montreal Canadien. But of course, nothing is ever set in stone when it comes to things like this. Just because Cooley, Jiricek, Harris, and Slafkovsky were told that they're on the starting lineup, it does not mean that they're going to play 82 games on the year. like the Habs told them. There are many other good players that could make staying in the NHL difficult. And so, when it comes to things shifting quickly, for Juraj Slafkovsky, he's going to get his 9 games, and whether or not he is good enough to be a mainstay NHL contributor by the time 9 games wraps up, we'll see whether or not the Canadiens decide to burn a year off his ELC by keeping him up with the club. If they send him down, then okay, that's going to be the season. He's likely going to spend the rest of the 70-something games in Laval and hopefully come back in 23-24 as a much more mature, offensively potent, and let's just say more assimilated player. This was the exact scenario that we talked about in our video a few days ago, that hey, if Slafkovsky can really build upon the great games that he had towards the end of the preseason, I mean, he's got that first overall status. There's a right given to a player like this. This is not some random ELC, or not ELC, PTO random dude from the OHL that's a double, triple overager coming over here and impressing. This is the first overall pick that has an entire spotlight on him, and 2, 3, 4 amazing players right behind him in the shadows in Shane Wright, Simon Nemec. There are a lot of names that were taken after Slafkovsky that people are very high on. So for Juraj, he obviously has the biggest name on the market, not just in terms of the length of the name, because Slafkovsky is a pretty long name, but in terms of the magnitude of importance that carries. So for Montreal, you want to sell tickets? You want to go out there and ice a roster that people are going to want to see? Sure. Bring in Slafkovsky for at the very least 9 games, try to have him expand on the good preseason end that he had, and hope that the preseason Slafkovsky that we had seen at the beginning, against Buffalo, etc., hope that that guy doesn't really exist anymore. Okay, maybe he exists in some capacity, but all the things he had tried to do offensively, the cycling in the corners, controlled zone entries, hopefully he's able to do that with a little bit more refinement to NHL style and systems so that he's actually being more effective when he does that. He's got 9 games to prove it, and we'll see where it goes from here. I also wanted to talk about a few perspectives of Canadiens fans, because if you go over to the Habs subreddit, this is the tweet made by Eric Engels talking about how Cooley, Geekie, Harris, and Slafkovsky made the team. Blaze of Glory 72 says, I would have preferred Slafkovsky start in Laval, honestly. There are some very obvious aspects of his game he still needs to work on, and while he can do that in Montreal, he's going to be under a microscope here. I suppose he could get sent down later, but the longer he stays up, the harder it gets to justify sending him down without looking at it like a failure. After butchering the development of Galchenyuk and Korchinski by rushing them, I would have erred on the side of caution here. And I don't know, maybe that's a traumatic response, coming out here saying, yeah, the Canadiens have rushed guys in before and it's not been great, so hopefully the same thing doesn't happen here with Juraj Slafkovsky. I will say, though, when it comes to Galchenyuk and Korchinski, those guys actually did have pretty good starts to their careers, I would say. A lot of people were still excited for Galchenyuk after the rookie season that he had had. And for Korchinski, I still remember everybody saying that the guy was going to be the next Barkov because he had the same production, or he had a better points per game, or whatever the heck it was. It's a process, isn't it? As for Slafkovsky, I honestly would not be too surprised if he goes out there and he doesn't score too many points. Like, we had already seen in the preseason that it's not really like Juraj was an absolute game changer offensively. Like, he had a few good moments and he had a few points, but he wasn't Cole Caulfield. He wasn't Nick Suzuki. And so if Slafkovsky goes out there and plays well enough that he gets the full 82-game sample, he plays well enough that the team is like, okay, we can justify burning a year off your ELC to have you play in the lineup, I honestly wouldn't be too surprised if Slafkovsky only had like 30 points, 25 points. Like, if he gets more than that, okay, great. I would like to see him get more than that, but at the end of the day, this is step 1 of proving that he deserves the spot in the first place. He's the first overall pick. He's got all this attention on him. The Canadiens, they want to sell tickets, so they're going to put him in the lineup. It's okay. They've got 9 games to see whether or not he's good enough to stay in the lineup and burn off that ELC year. So, for now, he's made the team, alongside of guys like Arber Xhekaj. You have Jordan Harris in there, Caden Cooley, all young players on the squad. Very nice. By the way, most of them are defense as well, so yeah. Talk in the comments your thoughts about Juraj Slafkovsky making his impact on the Canadiens and making the team. He said himself that he can finally tell his parents to come over to Montreal and watch the games because he knows he's going to be there. But either way, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Where do you think Slafkovsky is going to go? What do you think the Canadiens should do with his development? If you had to predict what happens between now and 9 games into the season, How well do you think Slafkovsky goes out there and plays? I hope you enjoyed this Juraj Slafkovsky 99, and bye.